And we're back.
And we're back to episode 2 with Shai Wininger of Lemonade. And in episode 1, we talk about more comfortable things of just having AI agents keep the lights on, right? And now we're moving to uncharted territory, right? It's the uncomfortable layers of what happens when, or what would happen when we let agents actually run the company.
Yeah.
You mentioned you had an interesting notion of humans becoming tools. How should we be thinking about this? Like, what does it mean a human is a tool? Is it when the situation is ambiguous? Like, walk me through that.
Yeah. The way we do claims for it, I just give this as an example of a real world situation where we have humans becoming tools. So you have regulation. You have to be compliant of different laws and rules. You have complexity levels that you can't always foresee. You have someone who their home burnt down because of a lightning strike that hit a friend's car that then blew up and went in, with flames into their home and then is it a car claim? Is it a home claim? Is it the neighbors? It's like there are, life finds a way to throw curveballs at you, especially with insurance. And it's like you see some crazy things. And so you got to have that layer of escalation. You got to have something that when, if you let an AI run and do things, it's not always going to be able to solve everything to the level that you expect. We know that there's hallucinations. I think it's a shrinking world. I think it's, AI is becoming better. And so it's mostly about where you set the guardrails, where you set the boundaries. You want to tell it, hey, when you have a lawyer jumping on the case and they're saying, hey, we're representing Mr. X and we don't want you, generating language to that lawyer so that it can then use it in court. That's not a good idea, right? So that's going to be an escalation. If you're dealing with a complex claim, if there's something about the law that we know is very sensitive, if the regulator in that state does not allow AI to deal with a certain case, then it will automatically escalate to a human. Now, the way I think we used to think about this is, we escalate to human because there's a certain layer, and then if it doesn't succeed, then the humans will come in and kind of save the day. I think the right framework to look at it is, no, the default's going to be an agent. The default's going to be AI. And then if it needs the human, it's going to summon it. It's going to call it. And we're going to have a tool. And we have a tool. In the list of tools AI has, 99% of them are APIs. One of them is a human. And they can bring in the claims adjuster or some kind of an advisor to come in and then take over the claim and maybe then pass it on back to the agent once they've done their bit.
How can you measure uncertainty, though, right? Because you want to call the human when you're uncertain or when the risk profile is too high. And in insurance, it's kind of like built into the business. But if I think about replicating the system, like, how does uncertainty look like? Like, when do I call the human?
Yeah. So the different kinds of uncertainties, I think it's, one kind is to just ask the AI to have a certain level of certainty of its ability to understand the situation at hand. And you see if you score it, you just ask it to score how confident it is. What's the confidence level between 0 and 1 that it knows A, what the human has asked, if it's an incoming request from a human, and B, what needs to be done next based on the set of rules. You'll see that you'll get a lot of variance there. It's not always going to be one. And so that would be the first cycle. First you qualify things. You use the AI to report back how well it's going to perform that task before it even started doing it. And then you triage that based on that. So higher confidence, you'll let it do its thing.
Oh, wait, let me pause. Something is really interesting concept because ranking has been terrible with LLMs, right? Same
Mhm.
as math.
Mhm.
They don't really know like a 1 or 2 or 3. But you said something which is a great takeaway, which is ask the LLM to plan.
Mhm.
And if the plan doesn't make sense, because that can be evaluated, then the LLM is uncertain. They won't be able
Yeah.
to tell you they're uncertain, but they'll build a shitty plan.
Yeah.
Right? They'll most likely hallucinate the plan. So that's a great concept.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they actually, when you score things, if you ask the right question and you give them examples of good and bad, then they'll do a pretty good job at it. Well, it doesn't have to be 100% accurate, right?
Yeah.
Because we're just
They'll
triaging
they'll
here.
classify.
They'll be able to
Classification is fine.
classify
Yeah.
this and then connect this to a score of a certainty level. Once you do that, that's one level of certainty. The other level of certainty is something that you know about the real world. You have two APIs. One is deactivate the nuclear reactor's cooling system. The other one is send an email. If someone calls the first one, I don't want you to do it. And so there's level of risk of doing certain actions that you can define in advance. You can either work with a whitelist, with a blacklist, with a classified list. You can work with a network of lists. What we've done with CX, because it's a very complicated thing that you open up a topic, let's say billing. Within billing, you have claims and you have payments. Within payments, you have renewals or stuff, and then you have we noticed that if we just you give an LLM a really long list, flat list,
Yeah.
it's not great. It's
Yeah.
going to have a bell
Meant to be
curve of
hierarchical.
attention.
Yeah.
Attention is going to be in the beginning and the end. The middle is going to be problematic. And so instead of that, you create a hierarchy of prompts and you use those things to.
Yeah.
And so
That's right.
as you navigate through the hierarchy, you can get to points where you say, okay, ding, escalate to a human. Because we took you through a virtual IVR
Mhm.
of the LLM navigates its way into calling a human instead of just making a first prompt.
That's
attempt.
again an important thing. What many LLM vendors have is the needle in the haystack problem,
Mhm.
right? So they show you, hey, we have 1,000,000 tokens that in the context that you can call. What most people don't notice is that the latest research actually shows that the longer it is, the less attention it has. So it actually it can answer very simple questions
Mhm.
as the context gets longer, but people think that it can process the full duration. So I love the hierarchy concept. All right. So humans are a margin problem, right?
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yeah.
So when you have such a system, it goes ahead, calls a human. How do you self-improve so it doesn't call the human again next time or the time after that? Like, how are you thinking about self-improvement loops?
Yeah, when you need to, right? Certain human calls are bugs, and certain human calls are right. And so you want to measure for the wrong ones and make sure that 100% of the cases that human should have been called, they are called. We track this. We look at a thing called automation rate at Lemonade, and this is a ratio between a certain volume of work and the humans um, responsible for performing that work. And so either the human team remains the same size and work volume grows, and then you know that you have improvement, or the human team shrinks, which is obviously a better outcome. Human team shrinks, and then workload grows, and then you have a even steeper slope of improvement. But I think that you should measure things down funnel. Everything should be measured tactically. Like the team working on the problem should be measuring the small things. But I don't care about those. I don't care about how many commits of code were done by agents. I don't care how many lines of code. In fact, I want to have shorter code.
Mhm.
So these are what we used to call vanity metrics in the days
Yeah.
of the Google and the Mixpanel and all that stuff. We don't care about. We care about how how many features we planned to deliver in a certain quarter, we managed to get out much sooner. Based on a task complexity that we've measured and we have a constant ability to evaluate how many of those ship to production per person, per complexity bracket.
Hmm.
And so that's where you're looking to see the improvement, because if it doesn't translate to dollars, if it doesn't translate to impact, whether it's dollars outgoing or incoming, it's not really important.
But you implicitly even include something which in investment is very clear, but it's fairly early, which is benchmarking is meaningless these days because the world has changed, right? If you look at, you mentioned vanity metrics. So vanity metrics, like what's my CAC LTV ratio? What's my monthly versus daily? So you always had kind of the benchmark that numbers that people were looking for. But now if you look at, hey, what's the productivity per unit of work? Nobody measured it before. Like there are no
Hmm.
benchmarks.
Hmm.
What you should be looking is constant improvement.
Yeah.
Right? How do you get people to move to that paradigm, right? Like it's a sort like benchmarking is a sort of mental laziness.
Yeah.
If I have this ratio, I'm good. If I don't, I'm bad, right? But now if I don't know what that ratio should be, like, how do people behave in such a world where you're just looking for improvement all the time?
Well, I don't think we ever used benchmarks.
Hmm.
Um, I think just because we didn't have access to them. um, in our line of work, the insurance space is very, very opaque. There's not a lot of sharing in
Yeah.
what's going on, and so you don't really have access to what the neighbors are doing. Uh, and so you need to invent your own path. And I think we have very clear and concrete ways to measure whether our business is efficient. These are standard ways to measure. Forget about EBITDA even. I'm talking about variable cost, talking about unit economics.
Loss
Um,
ratio.
Loss ratio is one. Expense ratio is the other. LAE is a way to measure the cost of handling claims, just the cost of the operation without the payment
Yeah,
itself for the
which no one
claim, right?
published. Yeah.
Which is probably one of the best indicators for how efficient an insurance company is. And so without this, we had a general idea of what the industry is doing, but who cares?
Yeah.
We need to be an order of magnitude better than them.
So you're saying you had an easy job because you never had the data. So you never had benchmarks.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good problem to have, like structural limitations.
Yeah.
So going back to kind of level 2 and level 3 of the framework that you presented, like up to a point where the agents actually write the features according to
Mhm.
business needs. Can walk me through this?
Last episode, we spoke a little bit about self healing, which is level one, a system that heals itself, that fixes its own bugs. Level two is self implementing. Self implementing means that it's only the implementation phase that is done by agent, but the initiation phase is still done by humans, product managers, stakeholders, understanding that we want to go after a certain problem or after a certain area in the product. This is still human driven. The way it works is basically through our ticketing system. We have the system like every other company has. Product managers go in, they find, they work on a certain area in the system or a certain KPI, and they would go and build specs. Right? That's how it works today. It's how it always
Always. The
worked in the
past 20 years. Yeah.
past 20 years. And in this case, where we don't need specs anymore, not in the traditional way. So in a self-implementing system, what you want to do is shrink the workflow as much as you can and bring it as close to the agent as possible. And so a lot of the things we used to do, writing specs in a Google Doc, to me, that makes no sense at all anymore. It feels like we need to write those instructions. These specs are basically fancy prompts, right? And so there's a very thin line between a prompt and a spec and a design and a testing document. It's just these things, the lines blur, and I think that's why a lot of this will find its way into the development platforms in the beginning. It's like IDEs in the beginning, and then at some point, I think we'll need to get something that's better than IDE. I think the IDE is also a piece of the puzzle. It's a subsystem, but when we get to level 3, where the system itself drives innovation, IDE is no longer relevant. You don't need it anymore because an IDE is a way for humans to write code or supervise code. um, when you get to level 3 where you have agents, just they understand what they need to do, they have an opinion about how to solve a problem, they can basically try 20 different ways to solve a problem and then test them with synthetic users and then see how people behave, how they convert, if they are able to pass through a certain UI experience by understanding what's on the screen, so on and so forth. And after having all those layers of defense, basically start deploying features without any humans to into the wild and see how users interact with them, track the KPIs, see how the business is, or how the feature is doing, and then kill the ones that don't work and work more or improve or expand the exposures of the ones that do. And so over time, you just get an ever evolving system that drives itself towards the company's goals.
So, how do roadmaps behave in such a world? Do we just give up on roadmaps? And I think it actually works fairly well in a B2C company where it's you have clear inputs, clear outputs. In a B2B company where the roadmaps actually turn into commitments to customers,
Mhm.
how does that look like?
It's an interesting problem to have with the B2B. I think there's some of this is being solved by having by signing on to the beta features kind of thing, where you want to get all the experimental new stuff, and then it's like you have this almost like B side where you can decide to play with those things as a customer, and then if things show that they have value as a B2B customer, I use them. I have provide positive feedback, then they can find it their way into the general customer base. I think from a predictability perspective and communication perspective with customers, what's coming, when, and so on, I think that's a channel that you maintain. I don't think for the time being it's something you need to give up, but at a certain point, and it depends how far into the future you want to look at, those B2B systems are not going to have humans on the other side as well. So their expectations are going to be very different. If we have roadmaps, we're going to have synchronizing tables, or almost like an orchestra have notes, and you know what's going to come at any given point in time throughout the entire ecosystem of a set of companies. So a Figma, a Cursor, the tool that helps you do the testing at the validation phase, they will all have a map. It's like a joint, almost like an MCP for roadmaps that you can then plan ahead, so that the third layer, when they build features, they can know that it's not, they can't build that feature right now because we're missing the validation phase for it. But in a month from now, we are going to be able to do that, and so it will go into the backlog and wait until the technology is there in order to be able to implement that.
Well, the flip side of that, which I think is interesting, is customer. Like, how do you figure out what the customer actually needs? You're thinking about signals of kind of conversion funnels or maybe claims or what marketing channels happen. But if I think of customers, even simply that we both know really well, like one of the
And love.
superpowers that they
Yep.
have is, and it's daunting, but it's they interview people for 5 months, super feels super slow, and then in 2 months they actually build an incredible product that everyone loves, right? So that segment of actually collecting information from the customers or the prospects, how does this integrate into? Is it ongoing interviewing that is also done by a layer um, of AI, maybe AI in collaboration with humans? Like, how we think about funneling in customer feedback in such a
Mhm.
system?
So that's something that already works today with the existing models. If you take, and we do this all the time, we scan the internet for all feedback coming from customers from all channels, app stores, customer reviews, websites, stuff like that. And it goes into a model that then is able to extract what we call the voice of the customer. It looks at repeating themes. It scores them based on repetition, based on the even the pathos of the person saying those things, how intense was the feedback versus kind of a mild and laid back, and then scores things based on what we need to fix in order to make the system better.
That's actually a product
Um,
by itself. It's like,
yeah,
do you put that into a queryable or promptable database? Like, so
yeah.
voice of the customer, but now it's kind of a digital twin of the customers that you can query on an ongoing basis.
So not yet. That wasn't the purpose. The what I mentioned before is a synthetic customers. This dream project of mine that we didn't get to yet, but at some point, I think we're going to try and build a synthetic model of each one of our customers' segments, so that we're able to test software and also features and price points and conversion and a bunch of other things with a digital twin with an alter ego of the customer without even deploying it to production. I hope we'll get to this this year, but who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But it's a really interesting project, and I don't know if there are companies working on it. I think that I saw something going on in that space, but it's a really interesting thing to go after.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. There's a bunch of research. Most of it is pretty crap. But you actually see, for example, convincing bots. Pretty recent research. We'll pivot towards the founders, right? I'm thinking about such a database of being able to understand the customer. But where have you seen like failure modes where founders invest in the wrong things around AI, right? So it used to be that when I got a deck 5 years ago
Mhm.
that said we're an AI first company, you could call bullshit because no one had the data. But now when you have zero shot or one shot or few shot, like, AI is everywhere.
Mhm.
Like, but what are the failure modes? Like, what do people tackle via AI that doesn't make any sense to you?
Hmm. Um, it's a big question. Maybe a different way to approach this would be to think about what I think would lack value, and I just think that everybody, everything is becoming so easy, and value is created from hard things. And so that just this basic premise of if you're building something over the weekend, I don't think that has value. It doesn't matter what you're doing. I don't think it's going to hold for a week, for 2 weeks. Maybe you'll be able to convince a couple of poor investors to jump into this, but it's not. I feel like the hardest problems are the ones that AI doesn't necessarily help us solve for the value that we're generating today. One is distribution. If you don't have a unique way to solve distribution, that's a big deal. Unit economics is a direct extraction of this, right? The other thing is having a moat that's outside of the software business, like regulation, stuff like that. Complexity of physical products, oil, material science, stuff like that, that is hard to solve. I feel like that's where the value is created. And so maybe I approach it from a different angle, which is if I'm starting up a new thing and I don't have any one of those things figured out in a way that I believe the next person with a cursor is going to be able to build what I just built in 10 minutes, then doesn't matter how smart the idea is. I just don't think it has value anymore.
Like time, if you think of it, if you're able to create self improvement loops, then at least that time protects you, right? So if you can build something in 10 minutes a day, a
Hmm.
weekend, but then first to market, like how big of an advantage is it over time if I can actually make my lifetime value bigger because I have a loop that generates more value the more people use it? Like, is that real or I'm curious about
I
that.
think it's going to shrink. Like the time gap, head start thing. I don't know. I just don't believe in it anymore. I feel like software has become such a commodity that even if it's not right now, a year from now or 6 months from now, it's going to be such a meaningless indicator for whether your business is going to succeed that it has to fall on the other things. It reminds me of the days like you go back 20 years ago. Um, you know, people, especially in Israel, they didn't know how to create great presentations to get funded. Right? You look at slides, they will all look like shit. You understand it. They have no idea of how a company brand should look like, and then you saw something different and hey, wait a minute, I want to see this guy. There's something there. They understand. They took the effort. They went through the effort. They took the time to perfect things to a certain, and it's just design, I know, and it's just a very early stage. It doesn't really matter, but it does, because it's a signal. Right now, you can't have this anymore because everything looks great, because it takes a minute to make things look great. And so even before AI, by the way, tools to make things like that.
So what's the current signal?
Grit, intelligence, the control of an idea, having a very unique perspective into the world, having a unique background, coming from something that's unexpected, a physicist going after hiring, an artist going after rocket fuel. Something that you bring in that isn't the same pattern that has been done for many, many years before. But mostly I look for the hard things. What is it that you've done that's super hard, that is a very unique approach, that requires a lot of resilience, grit, investment, time that most others will never go through? And you've done that, and that's your mode.
I love this. And it also changes the entire venture model, but that's a topic for a way different discussion. Anyway, Shai, thank you. This was awesome.
Thank you, Eden.
If you have any questions, comments, flames, or just want to recommend new people on the show, email us at almosthuman@aleph.vc. I'm Eden Shochat. Thanks for listening. See you next episode.